Imagine the cold wind of the north biting your skin, the crash of waves against wooden ships, and the distant howl of a raven. In this land of frost and fire, a name echoed through the ages, Ragnar Lothbrok. But here's the truth. No one can say with certainty whether Ragnar was a man of flesh and blood or a shadow born from the whispers of skalds, the Viking storytellers. His name first surfaced not in stone records, but in sagas, half history, half poetry. Ragnar's story begins in the 9th century, a time when the world was changing. Europe's kingdoms were fragile, monasteries were rich, and the Northmen, those fierce seafarers from Scandinavia, were hungry for wealth, land, and glory. To them, the world was an open sea, and their gods, like Odin and Thor, demanded boldness. The first mentions of Ragnar describe a warrior who was feared by kings and loved by poets. He was said to wear trousers made from rough animal skins, boiled in pitch, Lothbrok meaning hairy breeches. These were not just clothes, they were a symbol of a man who walked between myth and manhood, a farmer who could become a king. But how much of this is true? The problem with Ragnar's story is that it was passed down through sagas like the tale of Ragnar Lothbrok and the tale of Ragnar's sons. These tales were written centuries after the events they describe. They mix real battles, real places, and real raids with larger-than-life feats, slaying dragons, marrying shield maidens, and claiming descent from Odin himself. What we do know is that his legend begins at the edge of history, a flicker in the dark. Chronicles from England and France speak of Viking raids led by powerful chieftains, and among them, names that sound like Ragnar appear, Regnar, Reginharus. Were these the same man? Or did several warriors' deeds merge into one great legend? And this is where the mystery hooks us. Ragnar's story was not just about one man, it was about what he represented. Courage in the face of death, hunger for the unknown, and the eternal Viking dream, to carve one's name into the world before the final voyage to Valhalla. This is the birth of Ragnar Lothbrok, not from a single birth cry, but from the clash of sword and saga, where truth and myth drink from the same horn. Before Ragnar Lothbrok became a name that thundered across Europe, he was said to be a simple man living close to the soil, a farmer, a father, and a husband. But in the world of the Vikings, being a farmer did not mean a life of quiet routine. It meant survival in a harsh land where the winters were long, the soil thin, and the seas always calling. Every farmer was a fighter when the time came, and every household was a small fortress. According to the sagas, Ragnar was born in southern Scandinavia, though the exact place remains uncertain. Some say Denmark, others Sweden or Norway. What they agree upon is that he came from modest beginnings but carried an ambition far greater than his farm could hold. He learned the ways of the land, ploughing fields, tending livestock, but his eyes often strayed toward the horizon. It was the horizon that separated the known world from the dreams of glory. His early life was marked by struggle, but also by opportunity. The North during the 9th century was a place of shifting power. Small kingdoms rose and fell, and the old gods demanded bravery. A man with courage, cunning, and a strong sword arm could rise from the fields to the halls of kings. Ragnar married Lagertha, a woman as fierce as any warrior, and together they raised their children not just to survive, but to believe they were destined for more. But here lies the question: was Ragnar truly just a farmer, or was this image a clever mask? The sagas describe a man who was always more than what he appeared. A farmer who trained like a warrior. A father who spoke like a leader. A husband who dreamed like a king. To the people around him, Ragnar was both familiar and mysterious, one foot in the mud, the other in the mead hall. As a young man, he was fascinated by tales of lands to the west, England, Francia, and beyond. These were lands said to overflow with silver, grain, and sacred treasures. While others were content to raid their neighbors or pay tribute to local earls, Ragnar wanted something more, a legacy. What makes this part of Ragnar's story powerful is its relatability. He was not born with a crown, he earned his reputation with restless ambition. He understood the old saying, in the land of the Vikings, you can be born a farmer but die a king, if you dare. This early life shaped his decisions, his cunning, and his rebellion against the old ways. It was the soil that grounded him, and the hunger in his heart that lifted him. To the Vikings, the line between mortal and divine was thin, like mist on a cold fjord morning. They believed the gods walked among them, whispered in the winds, and chose their champions on the battlefield. Ragnar Lothbrok's story often dances on that very edge. Was he simply a clever man, or was he marked by Odin himself? The sagas paint Ragnar as more than a warrior. They describe him as cunning, unpredictable, and blessed with visions. Ravens followed him in many tales, ravens being the messengers of Odin, the All-Father, the god of wisdom, war, and death. Some claimed Ragnar could read the omens in their flight, others said he carried a charm blessed by the gods, and a few believed he was born from Odin's bloodline. But why did people believe this? In a time where storms decided harvests and the sea decided fates, those who achieved great victories were often seen as chosen. Ragnar's raids, his rise from a simple man to a leader feared across kingdoms, and his daring ventures westward all fed this belief. He succeeded where others failed, survived when others perished, and dreamed of lands no one else dared to sail toward. This belief served Ragnar well. In Viking culture, to be touched by the gods was not just a sign of luck, it was a tool of power. If the people believed Odin guided your axe, they would follow you, fight for you, and die in your name. Ragnar, whether by faith or by calculation, allowed this aura to grow around him. His stories were told in mead halls, sung by skalds, and every retelling added a little more divine spark to his name. Yet, there is no proof in the chronicles of Odin speaking to him, no record of divine intervention written in Latin or inked by monks. The Christian scribes who recorded the Viking raids wrote of Ragnar as a threat, a destroyer, a scourge, but never as a demigod. This raises the question, was the divine connection real, or was it the work of storytelling, of sagas blending fear with fascination? The truth likely lies in between. Ragnar understood the power of myth. He wore symbols that inspired awe, he invoked the gods before battle, and he sailed into the unknown as if destiny was calling. Whether or not Odin truly chose him, the belief that he was chosen made Ragnar larger than life, and that belief was often all that mattered. And so, Ragnar stood between gods and men, mortal in body, mythic in presence. Every victory, every raid, every whispered prophecy tied him closer to the All-Father's shadow. The first great waves of Viking raids crashed upon the shores of Europe in the late 8th and early 9th centuries. Among them, the name of Ragnar Lothbrok began to stir fear in monasteries and royal courts alike. But what really happened during these first raids? Were they the work of a single man, or a tide of warriors whose deeds were later tied to one legendary figure? One of the earliest recorded attacks often linked to Ragnar is the raid on the Lindisfarne monastery in 793 AD. Monks wrote of heathen men descending from the sea, bringing fire and steel. They slaughtered, looted, and vanished like a storm. Was Ragnar among them? The sagas do not name Lindisfarne, but they describe similar raids on England's coasts, rich with silver and gold, defended only by prayer and thin walls. The Chronicles of Francia also speak of a fearsome Viking named Regnar, who in 845 led a fleet of 120 ships up the river Seine to Paris. The city was ransomed with a massive payment to make the invaders leave. Some historians believe Regnar and Ragnar may have been the same person, their names twisted by languages and time. Others argue the raids were the work of many chiefs, later woven into one saga hero to inspire generations. These raids were more than acts of greed, they were messages. They showed the might of the Northmen, their mastery of the sea, and their hunger for wealth and renown. For Ragnar, if he truly led them, they were stepping stones to immortality. Each monastery burned, each king forced to pay tribute, each whispered tale in the night. These built the myth brick by brick. But here is where fact and fiction blur. The sagas describe Ragnar slaying dragons, courting princesses, and winning battles with cunning traps and magical garments. Historical accounts speak of leaders using tactics, ships with shallow drafts to sail up rivers, and the element of surprise. Which version do we believe? Perhaps both, for even history carries the scars of exaggeration when told by survivors. Fear was the greatest weapon. Monks and chroniclers exaggerated the horrors to make sense of their suffering, while Viking poets glorified the raids to honor their heroes. Between the two, a legend was born, a man who could appear at dawn, vanish by dusk, and leave behind a trail of smoke and sagas. These first raids turned Ragnar, whether he was one man or many, into a nightmare for the Christian world and a beacon for Viking youth. For them, he was proof that a farmer could shake the thrones of kings. Every legend has an ending, and for Ragnar Lothbrok, that ending is as mysterious and debated as his beginning. The sagas tell of his capture by King Arella of Northumbria, who threw him into a pit of venomous snakes. Ragnar, wounded and mocked, is said to have laughed at death, singing that his sons would avenge him. How the little piggies will grunt when they hear how the old boar suffered. It is a line that echoes across time, part threat, part prophecy. But did this truly happen? The historical evidence is thin, scattered between Norse poetry and Christian chronicles written by men who saw the Vikings as demons. Some say Ragnar's death was real, others believe it was the merging of several chieftains' fates into one dramatic tale. Regardless of how he died, what followed is undeniable. The name Ragnar Lothbrok became more powerful in death than in life. His sons, Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, and others, waged great wars across England and Europe. The chronicles tell of the Great Heathen Army, a massive Viking force that ravaged English kingdoms in revenge for their father's death. Whether or not Ragnar had truly been thrown into that pit, the story became a rallying cry. It unified warriors, it terrified kings, and it fed the legend. Over the centuries, the story of Ragnar was told, retold, and reshaped. Poets made him larger than life, plays cast him as a tragic hero, and modern television turned him into a global icon. His legacy survived because it was more than a man. It was a story about ambition, exploration, faith, and rebellion against fate. Why does Ragnar still fascinate us? Because he stands at the crossroads of truth and myth. He reminds us that history is not always about cold facts. It is about the tales that survive the fires of time. A farmer who may have been a raider, a father who may have been a king, a mortal who may have been chosen by gods. Ragnar Lothbrok is all of these, and perhaps none of them. In the end, his story is a mirror. It reflects our own hunger for adventure, our defiance of limits, and our need to believe that one person, no matter how humble their beginnings, can carve their name into eternity. Ragnar did not just live. He became a force, a myth that still sails on the winds of the North Sea, carried by every retelling. And that is his greatest conquest. Not land, not silver, but immortality.